Welcome to Waterside Chat. Tom Sadler talks with guests who depend on healthy oceans and fisheries for their recreation and livelihoods. And now, let's get started.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's Waterside Chat. I am really delighted today to welcome my good friend, Jean Flemma. Jean's a long-term policy hand up in Washington, D.C., around the country, and in as we can see in her background, on the Galapagos. We both spent some time on Capitol Hill. She's always been important and very wise counsel on fisheries policy. Jean is the co-founder of the Urban Ocean Lab and director of the Ocean Defense Initiative. This afternoon, we're going to be talking about the recently released Ocean Climate Action Progress Report. So, Jean, without further ado, welcome to Waterside Chat.
Hi, Tom. Thank you. I would say, I think I would just reframe one thing you said, which is I have a lot of opinions about fisheries policy. I'm not sure if everyone thinks it's always wise, my opinions, but I do have a lot of opinions. That's true.
I greatly appreciate your opinions. I consider your opinions wise counsel. Those who are not smart enough to understand how wise your good opinions are it's only their own fault for that.
Oh, well, that's all we can do is just, do what we do.
And you and I think, have a bit of a reputation for doing what we do. So
yeah.
Opinions are not something that I've been shy about sharing over the years. And maybe I learned that from you.
I doubt it. I'm sure it's vice versa.
Yeah, I think we come by it naturally. Well, let's jump in a little bit. I want to set the stage for this to talk about the progress report by actually taking a step back and talking about the first thing that you guys put together, the blueprint. So can you give us some background on that, what it was, why you guys felt the need to do that, how it came about?
Sure. So maybe you could even put we can definitely share the link for the blueprint either in the chat or later at the end. I know when I used to have meetings on Capitol Hill, people are advised never give your handout until the end of the meeting, because then the person you're talking to will spend the whole time reading your handout instead of listening to you. So I'm hesitant to share the blueprint link now, so everyone just starts reading that instead of listening to us, Tom. But you decide what makes the most sense.
You're good counsel there. That's as a longtime lobbyist, it was like I wouldn't let my clients, or I would never pull paper out and put it in front of them
until the end.
Exactly.
Right, exactly.
Let me leave this behind for you.
Okay. Yes, exactly. So we'll share the link for the blueprint at the end of this conversation.
And for those listening, we'll put it in the show notes as well.
That'll be great. Before I sort of dive in on the blueprint, I thought I would just take it even one step back and talk about the hero of the story, which is the ocean, which is obviously, as many people know, our most effective buffer against climate change. It's our largest heat sink. It's a carbon sink. And right now, the ocean has been absorbing a third of our global carbon dioxide emissions and more than 90% of the atmospheric heat that is created as a result of GHG emissions. And without that power that the ocean has in climate regulation, average temperatures on Earth, it's been estimated by scientists that the average temperature on Earth would be 122 degrees Fahrenheit. And this past couple of weeks, when we've seen these record heat waves gripping the United States and the globe, I think we have a sense of just how devastating it would be if our average regular temperature was 122 degrees. Many areas of the country and the globe would not be able to sustain that. And, climate change is obviously posing a lot of challenges and threats to the ocean. And as the ocean warms and becomes more acidic, It threatens food security, it threatens coastal communities, it's destroying coral reefs, and obviously for the fishing industry, one of the things that they're seeing as the ocean gets warmer is stocks moving north, which has significant implications not only for traditional fisheries, but also for managers who are trying to figure out how to manage those stocks that now are, showing up on their doorstep that they've never had to manage before. But the ocean is, as noted, has the potential to not just be this heat sink and this carbon sink, but it has the potential to offer other climate solutions and mitigate the impacts of climate change. And the estimate that we've seen is that the ocean solutions can offer about a 20% of the emissions reductions that we need globally that will help keep the planet livable. And that is things like decarbonizing shipping, electrifying ports, protecting blue carbon habitats, and implementing and developing offshore wind are different ways that the ocean can help us mitigate climate change. So with that in mind, when the new administration came into office, many organizations that have been working in the ocean space for a long time enthusiastically encouraged the administration to adopt a series of ocean climate targets. So that was 30%, 30 gigawatts of wind by 2030, decarbonizing shipping by 2050. And the administration went ahead and did adopt a series of goals related to ocean climate action that were very promising. And it was in that context that the advocacy community started thinking and decided that if the administration was going to start implementing some of these goals, we wanted to see them implemented in a more holistic way. And so we wrote a letter to the administration asking them to implement or to develop an ocean climate action plan that would be cross-cutting across agencies and would recognize that there's all these different things that are happening in the ocean, one, that are related to climate change, but in addition, there's already ongoing activities in the ocean, like fishing. And so we want to make sure that as the government was thinking about how they were going to implement ocean climate solutions, that they were doing it in the larger context of all the other activities that are happening in the ocean. And that was sort of the genesis of the blueprint, which was, as you noted, recommendations for what the administration should have in an ocean climate action plan that would recognize the roles of different agencies, different sectors of ocean users, and would be a comprehensive look at how they wanted to implement these priorities. And so the blueprint was this series of recommendations that we crowdsourced from a broad range of experts and advocates. And that became the basis of the plan that the administration put out this spring.
And to be clear, because you and I at least have a tendency to abbreviate everything. The blueprint we're talking about was the blueprint for ocean climate action.
Right.
Sorry. And we'll put no, it's not your fault. I should have done that. I just immediately roll into, we were talking about the blueprint, which is what the community used to encourage the administration to do X, Y, and Z. And so as I said, we'll put those in the show notes, but if you're listening and want to foolishly go Google blueprint and not pay attention to the important.
We have a website which is called oceanclimateaction.org, and that's where the blueprint is located. If you want to, the blueprint for ocean climate action is located there.
So the need to address these issues in the marine environment is nothing new, right? I mean, it's something that you and I've worked on. You've a longer tenure at it than I do. It's a very challenging and quickly evolving landscape or oceanscape that we're dealing with. In the blueprint, did you feel reasonably comfortable that the administration would be paying attention to what the community was asking?
Oh, yeah, and I should have mentioned that when the community wrote to the administration and asked them to develop an ocean climate action plan, President Biden subsequently did commit to that
Right.
in the fall of, I believe, 2021, and then again in 2022. I think maybe on World Ocean Day in 2022, they committed proactively to developing that plan. So we knew that once we wrote the letter, we
Right.
knew that they had committed to writing a plan. So then that was one of the reasons why we decided to pool all of these experts and recommendations and put them together into this document so that there would be a shared source of recommendations that of actions that could be included in the final plan.
Yeah, I mean, I really loved the notion of a crowdsourced approach with you gave them not only like a problem statement, but in the blueprint, if I recall, you actually gave them some actions. And what we'll talk about in a few minutes is what those actions were and really how they're doing, and then we'll talk a little bit about what the future looks like. But
yeah, the recommendations were very detailed, and I mean, I certainly could not have written that document by myself. It represents a broad range of expertise, and I think in many ways that's kind of how the network has functioned over time, which is a broad range of membership and expertise coming together to develop your platform and your priorities for your organizations that are members of the network. And that type of it's hard to do that. It's always easier if you just write your own opinions on a piece of paper or your own recommendations. It's a lot harder to come up with a document that is has broad input, but I think it's more powerful.
Well, you led me right into where I wanted to go with this, is that it is that's the work the network does, and it is challenging. Rob would tell you, I will tell you that, when you're trying to herd cats and trying to get to consensus, it's a challenge. So I think what the blueprint for ocean climate action was an important step. And I feel like the administration probably really appreciated having that broader consensus. I know, working on the Hill, it would always, one of the questions would be, okay, well, who else is in favor of what you guys want to do here? And when you've got as broad a organizational involvement in creating a blueprint, it's powerful. It's not something that's usually done. Is that fair?
I can't speak to whether it's usually done. I can speak to in the ocean community. I mean, I've worked on ocean issues for 30 years, more than 30 years. And I think that one of the challenges we've always faced is helping our issues rise to the top in terms, especially in the political environment. The ocean issues, fisheries and ocean issues don't necessarily rise to the top. We think they're very important, but it's sometimes hard to get the attention of decision makers. And so I believe when you bring organizations together to collaborate on the recommendations, to collaborate on the messaging, to collaborate on what you're asking for, you have a better chance of getting your issues to elevate them and have them amplified and have hopefully get decision makers to pay attention. So that, I think, that is sort of the theory, not the theory, but that is what we were thinking about when we did this, which was, if we want people to pay attention to these ideas and these recommendations, we need to have broad buy-in at the outset to ensure that that demonstrates, as you said, to, in this case, the administration, this isn't just one organization or two organizations, it's a broad range of organizations that are advocating for these things.
Well, and I think that's especially important, Gene, because in the court of public opinion in the halls of Capitol Hill, it's very easy to find one person who will tell you one thing, but to get that consensus, I think it's powerful. It's extremely powerful.
Well,
Hopefully,
I'll say that my experience working on the Hill probably trained me for that. Because for, you or any of your members that lobby Congress, that, as you just mentioned, congressional staff want to know who else agrees with you, because they're always trying to balance many different ideas, many different positions on things. And you learn when you work in Congress that you have to figure out how to find that sweet spot where you can get as many people on board as possible.
Well, yeah, and not to take us too far off topic, but relevant is when you're trying to legislate,
right?
That if, Congressman Sadler puts together a bill, it's Congressman Sadler's opinion and whatever scholarship he's put together, but it's going to get amended. It is going to get changed. And if the community that is interested in that legislation, so like the Magnuson Act or something else, if they can come to consensus without having to have Congress force them into doing that, I think it's a much better approach. And again, that's why we'll move on from the blueprint, but it is, to me, that was an extremely important foundational work done to address the problem. And, it's now leading us to the point where, okay, so how are we doing? But before we go there.
Well, and I will say before you go, I'm just going to say, we saw a lot of those recommendations reflected in the plan that the administration put out in May. So that was, to us, an affirmation of the fact that the time and effort we put into it was definitely worthwhile.
For sure. And I think that's, and I would like to think, and, success breeds success, is that the community would continue to look at this kind of an approach to doing things as they go forward with other challenging things that come before the marine resources community.
Yeah. And I do think that, like, as we mentioned earlier, that is one of the hallmarks of what the network does, that I think it's hard, but it's very worthwhile.
Yeah, it is hard and it's frustrating, but we, at least, we believe that it's the best approach. So, sort of like re-explaining what I was talking about when I was talking about the blueprint for ocean climate action. Let's talk a little bit, or tell us a little bit, about Gene Flemma as Gene Flemma. It's, what's the backstory on that? Where'd you come from? Where'd you go to school? How did you, how'd you wind up on Capitol Hill? And then how'd you wind up where you are now?
Yeah. Let's make it quick, because nobody really needs to hear that story. But I thought I was going to be a marine biologist when I was a child, and then I went to college and studied economics. So nice, Ellie is offering some peanut gallery commentary, which I love.
Exactly, the origin story.
Yeah,
I'm going to change it, Ellie, because of you, Ellie. I'm going to change this to, I'm going to ask the origin story from now on.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
right,
But
go
I did
ahead.
think I thought I was going to be a marine biologist, and then I went to college and studied economics because that's what everybody was doing at the time. It was a certain era where everyone thought they were going to go get rich on Wall Street. And then I
Okay.
tried that and I actually hated it. So apparently I didn't actually care that much about being rich because I'm certainly not. But so I went back to grad school at the University of Washington because I didn't want to have to go and get a whole nother undergraduate degree. So I went to grad school at the University of Washington to study marine policy because that was my way in
There you go.
back into the ocean world without having to go backwards in time and choose a new major. So I did my grad program at the UW and the School of Marine Affairs, which has a different name now. It's changed names about 4 times, but
Isn't it now the Gene Flemma School of Marine
the Gene
Policy
Flemma School of Marine
Expertise?
Studies and Awesomeness. Yes,
Yeah,
thank you.
exactly.
But and then I applied for what many people may be familiar with, which is the Sea Grant Fellowship, which gives you a
Yep.
1 year on Capitol Hill or in a government agency. And I was counseled by many people that I should try to go to Capitol Hill. You don't get to decide, they sort of decide for you, but I was counseled to sort of do whatever I could to get myself into the Capitol Hill cohort.
Right.
Which I successfully did. And so I was a Sea Grant Fellow. And the idea was that I was going to go to Washington, D.C. for 1 year and learn how Congress worked. And then I was going to use that. I don't even know what I thought I was going to do after that, but I didn't think I was going to stay in Congress. I definitely did not think that. So I went to Capitol Hill. I ended up going to work for a committee that doesn't even exist anymore called the Merchant Marine and Fisheries Committee. And my boss was a congressman from Massachusetts who was one of the authors of the Magnuson Fisheries Conservation and Management Act. He and Congressman Don Young from Alaska were the leaders of the legislation in the House. His name was Congressman Studs. And when I went to work on the committee, my boss, who is another sort of, I would call like legend in the fisheries policy world, Jeff Pike, said to me in the interview, "So do you know anything about fisheries?" And I said, "Not a thing. I know nothing about fisheries." And he said, "Well, are you willing to learn?" And I said, "Sure." And there you go. The rest is history. So here we are, right?
The rest is history.
So so I was I obviously did not leave Washington after 1 year. I stayed there for, well, on and off for more than 20 years, but over a period of 25 years, I was working on the Hill. And so I was heavily involved in the 1996 reauthorization of the Magnuson Act and then the 2006 reauthorization, which were I think the two most fundamental changes to the law that has given us the fisheries management regime that we have today. And then in the mid 20-teens, my husband had refused to move to Washington with me the second time. So I was commuting back and forth to the Midwest, and my husband said he thought it was time that we actually lived in the same place. I sort of agreed. So I left the Hill, but I continued to work from the outside as a consultant, doing ocean policy issues. And I've been doing that ever since, working with foundations and nonprofits on a wide range of ocean policy issues. And I run a project called the Ocean Defense Initiative, Tom, which I think was in the email that was sent out for the invitation, which is really focused on the idea of amplifying ocean issues, as I mentioned earlier, to elevate and hopefully help ocean issues break through with decision makers. So that's the focus of that project. And then I've been in the space ever since. Now I'm just doing it from the outside instead of the inside.
Well,
and I live in Portland, Oregon now, not Washington, D.C. I live on the other coast.
On the other coast.
Yeah, exactly.
And well, I think those of us who know you, those of us who have benefited from your good counsel and good opinions, are thrilled that you're still staying involved in this capacity to help bring that experience to decision makers today, because I think it's easy. We were talking earlier before we started recording that it's easy to forget all that, and there's a lot of experience, and I just in the history of the Magnuson Act, the Young Studs Marine Fisheries Act, right? It's and it will always be a fun tension between the Senate and the House on how things go. So but having that experience of understanding the politics of how legislation gets done, and then also I think what you all are doing with the Ocean Defense Initiative in amplifying the work and elevating the importance of ocean issues. As I've said to people over the years, that the marine policy landscape, oceanscape, is about 50 years behind the terrestrial side in terms of policy development and experience, and they're catching up quickly because of the work of things like the network and the Ocean Defense Initiatives and other good coalition groups. And I don't have anything against individual organizations, but I do think those coalition group type efforts are really effective.
Well, yeah, and you're a communications person, and Joe is a communications person. When I started doing the ocean defense work, I really wasn't that savvy in the communication side, and I won't claim that I am now, but I will say one of the things I learned was not only do you want the coalition, but you want a shared messaging. You want a shared message that everybody agrees to and that everybody is using, because that is how you're going to break through with your issues, is when you have a shared message and a shared goal that many are advocating for. That's really how you advance things in the policy world.
Yeah,
it made me think of 1996 when we did the first changes to the the first significant changes to the Magnuson Act. It was not the first time that the law was amended, but it was some of the most significant in its history. There was a group of advocates who had spent months and months working, as people call it, with the shoe leather, basically working the Hill, working members for months with a shared set of priorities, a shared message of what changes they thought needed to be in the law, habitat protection, stopping overfishing, those changes. And so by the time we actually went to the House floor for the debate on those changes, members of Congress who didn't know anything about fisheries management knew exactly what we were talking about, because they had heard from people regularly. I call it persistence and consistence. So you have to be consistent and you have to be persistent. And they had heard from the community quite regularly. And the network was very involved. The network was sort of the outgrowth of that. And that really had that is, to me, like a textbook example of why those shared messages and shared priorities can advance strong policy. But as we talked about earlier, it's hard to get to that.
Well, yeah, and that's the challenging work of trying to do coalition work. But the upside is the successful in that consistent and persistent, the consistent message persistently delivered, is key. And if you have 6 or 8 groups running around with inconsistent messages being persistent, you're not going to get a very good result, I would suspect. So
right, exactly.
Well, so let's turn to the most recent, the Ocean Climate Action Progress Report, which is sort of the follow-on, if I'm correct here, the follow-on to the blueprint. It's sort of a scorecard. It's why don't you tell us a little bit about
Sure.
what's in the progress report, what the key areas, and then let's talk about where we go from there.
Sure. So I am laughing at your use of the term scorecard, because when we this was another collaborative effort. No one group did this by themselves. We did this as a coalition, and not really a coalition, because it's kind of a shape-shifting group of folks that have participated in this. So but there were many experts, and they're in the document. You can see who some of the people were that contributed, but we started out with the idea that we might want to do a report card. How are we doing 1 year after the blueprint? How are things progressing in the ocean climate action agenda with the administration? But we quickly realized that trying to grade any of these categories would be virtually impossible. There would be no agreement, and it wouldn't really be that useful, because the metrics that you might use for grading would be completely subjective and not even consistent across the topic. So it would be very challenging. So instead, we decided that we would take these 8 categories of ocean climate action areas, if you will, and we would identify what's good that's happened, where has there been progress, and then follow that with sort of what are the critical next steps, and that the administration should be thinking about what's next. And so and then we kind of broke it up. It was, again, crowdsourced. Different experts worked on different sections. So that, I would say, like, overall, I think everyone that worked on this, and generally the community, feels like the administration has accomplished a lot. And a lot of good things have happened, and we feel very positive about that. And there's also a lot more things that could happen, but I'll just kind of highlight a couple of the things that with the good things, and then we can talk about sort of what's next. But we saw a lot of action by the administration to enhance coastal resilience and adaptation, which is not a mitigation side, it's the adaptation side of the equation. But many people that live in coastal communities right now know that as sea level rise, as more storms, as flooding, communities need to be given the resources to start planning for and adapting to these impacts. And so the administration established like a flood resilience and coastal resilience program. We saw significant money in the IRA and the IIJA for communities to implement coastal restoration projects, billions of dollars, that's in the past, the NOAA coastal restoration budget, every year they would do grants. It was probably around $40-50 million, which is good. But now we've got several $1 billion for coastal restoration projects, which is a big investment that's needed right now.
It's a BFD, and it's historic, isn't it?
It is historic.
The amount of money that went into habitat.
Yeah, and in fact, just in April, the administration put out the latest sort of round of call for grant proposals, and it was about $500 million. It's about 10 times what it would normally be for coastal restoration grants. So that's huge. And the Center for Coastal Coastal States Organization had done an assessment a few years ago of their coastal states to say, what's your need for coastal restoration projects? And the need was like upwards of $6 billion. And so the fact that we've got a down payment on that of 2 to 3 billion is significant. And it means we'll have to keep pushing for more resources, but it's a big step forward.
But
We never would have gotten ahead of that with just that 50 million or whatever a year.
And I think this is an important point, Gene, in that, it's always easy to say, here's what we need to do. But the question that always comes back is, how are you going to pay for it? And I think what's laudatory in the work of the administration is, and Congress, I mean, this was negotiated on Capitol Hill. It wasn't just an executive order. So it's legislation that was passed on the Hill.
No, and one thing I didn't note was that even before the blueprint and the recommendations from the community, the members on the Hill in the House had put together, first, the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis had a series of recommendations that included a whole suite of ocean climate actions that Congress and the administration should take. And then the House Natural Resources Committee chairman, the chairman at the time, Mr. Grijalva, and many of his colleagues wrote legislation to do that, to do many of the ocean climate solutions that people have been talking about. So Congress was even before the administration came into office, Congress was already laying out their own list, their own blueprint of what they thought needed to happen in the ocean climate space. And so by the time we got to the negotiation on the IIJA and the IRA, the community was asking for these things. Congress knew they wanted to do these things, and the administration had also committed to them. So there was this meeting of the minds where all the different players in that space knew that this needed to be part of any larger climate package.
Well,
so I think it's really important to give recognition to the congressional. We have a lot of ocean climate leaders in Congress, and they deserve a lot of recognition for that.
For sure. And the jaded old guy here is the one that says, yes, I remember all that, and thinking those guys will never get it funded. And here is, billions of dollars that are allocated towards dealing with this. So, you're
right. That's right. I mean, when they wrote those bills, that was the price tag for any of that was huge. And that is why I think when Congress started talking about what was first called reconciliation and then became the IRA and the IIJA, those investments, the infrastructure bill and then the IRA, which was the Inflation Reduction Act, they knew that this was their sort of once in a generation chance to get these investments in addressing the challenges of climate change, and that if they were going to be investing this money, the ocean climate solutions needed to be a part of those investments. And all the work that had been done before that laid the groundwork for that. If nobody had been thinking about what are the ocean climate solutions we need in the Select Committee report or in the House Natural Resources Committee, they wouldn't have been teed up and ready to go by the time we were talking about that investment in climate solutions.
For sure. So it's to me, it's a remarkable thing, and it's why I stepped in on it, was that these guys, not only did they were the issues, the challenges identified, but the funding actually wound up on the table, which is, it's remarkable in my experience.
That's always the challenge. I agree.
Absolutely.
Especially in the ocean space. We always have lots of things we want to do, and we never have enough money to do them.
Right.
A couple of the other areas I'll just flag where
sure, please.
I think there's been some good progress and success. Decarbonizing shipping and electrifying ports. There was a significant amount of money in the IRA and the IIJA for electrifying ports, which not only does that help address the impacts of climate change by reducing port emissions, it also is a benefit to local communities who live near ports where they are currently, the pollution from ports is a real thing, and
For
they're
sure.
often frontline communities that are bearing the burden of that pollution. So port electrification will benefit us from an emissions reduction standpoint, but it will also benefit nearby communities.
Yeah, I was interested in that or noting that the report recognized that those disadvantaged communities that wind up being in those industrialized areas around ports, they're going to benefit from the reduced air pollution, if for no other reason. It's worth doing.
Well, right, that is reason enough alone to
Right.
do it. But the added benefit of climate mitigation is certainly cannot be ignored.
For sure.
So, and then there has been investments in, and as I mentioned, the administration has committed to, obviously shipping is an international issue, and no country can do it by themselves, but the United States has committed to decarbonize, playing their role in decarbonizing the shipping industry by 2050. And we did make some progress on that at the recent International Maritime Organization meeting. But we're also seeing individual ports around the country that are proactively moving ahead in this space. For instance, the Port of Seattle has signed an agreement with Canada, with Canadian ports, to establish a green shipping corridor, which means that they would build the infrastructure that would allow ships to go between those ports using fuels that are not contributing to climate change ultimately. And then there's also another agreement that was signed between the port of Los Angeles, and another international port have signed agreement to create green shipping corridors. So that's happening. That's big progress. There's been, I think, some success in reducing plastic pollution and emissions, but there's a long way to go there. I would say. Everybody understands why plastic is terrible for the ocean. We've all seen it. We know about, the ocean patch and all of that. But I think one of the things that many people don't think about is that plastic production is a huge carbon emitter, and it's on track to be exceed the emissions of coal-fired power plants in the United States if we do not do something about the emissions of plastic production. So that is an area where there's been a lot of effort, and people don't necessarily think of that as an ocean climate issue, but it really is, not just because of the emissions, but also because of the impacts of plastic pollution on the ocean. We have also, I think, seen some progress in the climate ready fisheries space, but that there is still a lot to be done there. And I have some thoughts on that, but I feel like the administration, the agency, the National Marine Fisheries Service needs to be doing a lot more to support fisheries managers in addressing the challenges that climate change is posing to fisheries management.
Well, we could have a whole Waterside chat just on that subject, and I'm going to bookmark it for the future. And that you're absolutely right that there's a lot to be done on that front, on dealing with shifting stocks and it is a really challenging issue, and
yeah, it really is. And I think the agency should be doing a lot more, and needs to be doing a lot more. And they, thanks to the IRA, they've gotten a significant amount of funding to do more. But I
don't want to bash them, but I will make one snide remark, is that they usually talk about how they don't have enough money to do what they need to do. Well, that, at least in my opinion, that argument's taken off the table because of the funding from the IRA. But
it's a significant amount of funding. Agreed.
So
those are some of the big ones. I mean, there's other areas that are in the report, in the progress report and in the blueprint, but those are some of the big areas. And
Well, give me your, sort of high line. I'm not going to ask for a grade, but as you look at it, is it good, better?
progress is good.
yeah.
There's like a favorite, there used to be a TV show, it was called, it was the one, oh God, was it Network with, it was only 3 seasons. He was a news reporter and he decided he was going to like change the face of news, and Sam Waterston was his boss, and he's like,
Oh,
"How's
yeah.
it going?"
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
he's like,
that's a
"How's
terrific.
it going?" And he goes,
Yes.
"Progress is slow, but I'm in it for the long haul." So that's
Yeah.
kind of how I feel about ocean climate action. Progress is slow, but we're in it for the long haul. And it's,
I mean, do you feel optimistic? I mean, seeing this, I mean,
I feel optimistic in the sense that we have we have a president who mentioned ocean climate action at the White House in a speech he was giving. It just doesn't happen, right? So I feel optimistic in the fact that this administration recognizes the importance of ocean climate action. They have the agencies have come together, they've written a plan that they are committed to implementing, across the spectrum, the things that need to happen, from, as I said, decarbonizing shipping to offshore wind to climate ready. They have made those commitments. And the newsroom, thank you very much, Rob Vandermark. But I feel like this administration has made those commitments and they are acting on those commitments. So that is something to be one, appreciative of, grateful for, and optimistic about. It's always slower than we want it to be. That is always the challenge.
For sure.
That's just the way things are. That's not a fault of any, it's not the fault of anyone.
No, I mean, I'm not going to say it's not the fault of it. I think there are actors in the space here who would do things to upset the apple cart of progress that's being made.
Well,
that
is absolutely correct. And
in this context, with the players at the poker table that we have and the cards that were being dealt, I would say, you know what, I'd stay in the game. So,
yeah.
If you had to identify sort of like, what's the big communications challenge that you see that it would be helpful to have addressed?
Well, okay. So before we get to that, I just want to say one thing. You were just saying there's actors in the space that, can throw up roadblocks. And I'm going to be political for a minute. And I'm going to say that right now we have a situation in the House of Representatives where every single appropriations bill is loaded with riders that are literally denying the existence of climate change and are trying to hamstring agencies who are trying to address climate change and who are trying to help coastal communities, help frontline communities, help the fishing industry, do it, like you name it. They have a rider to prevent it. And in fact, there is a rider in the commerce appropriations bill, and commerce is where NOAA Fisheries is located. That rider would ban NOAA Fisheries from using any of its funding from the appropriations bill to do the science needed to help fisheries be climate ready. Yeah. So that would preclude them from using that money to provide managers with the science that they need to help prepare for what's coming. That blows my mind. At this point in time, it's one thing if you want to deny the existence of climate change. It is another thing to actively try and stop federal agencies from doing what needs to be done in this space to ensure that we have a livable planet in the next decade. It's
incomprehensible.
It's incomprehensible. So I guess if that kind of runs into your next question, which is what is our biggest communications challenge? And I find that it is how would I say it? It is understanding that we need to be acting now, right now. We have
Right.
no time to waste. We need to be addressing the impacts of climate change right now. We cannot wait any longer. We have already waited
Too
too
long.
long. We have waited many years too long. And so if you want a livable planet for your children, we can no longer kick this can down the road. And I think that is like one of our biggest communications challenges, because we have decision makers who continue to think that we can kick this can down the road. And I don't know what they think the outcome of that is going to be. I really don't understand it.
Yeah, I share your view, and it is again incomprehensible that people wouldn't say, gee, we ought to try to do something to keep the worst case, because the worst case scenario is you spend the money to make the planet better at the worst, and ultimately you're spending the money because you may need to be doing it for the planet to survive, for the species to survive. And if they don't care, great. I mean, I don't know what you can do for them. But
I guess that my communications challenge is how do we convince people that the urgency is real. I don't know. If I look around at the weather happening and the heat waves and the flood, like what happened in Vermont last week,
right.
and if I look around just in the United States, to say nothing of what's happening in other countries right now, and I see what is happening, I don't know what more we need to convince people, but apparently we need more, and I don't know how that comes to pass.
Well, I think, and we won't belabor this point other than to say that you're beginning to see business community react to this, with Allstate pulling out of California, with farmers pulling out of Florida, that when you can't insure your property, you're going to begin to open your eyes and say, hey, this is a little bit different than flood insurance. And so I think that's one aspect of this. It may get some people's attention, but I don't know that it's going to change the policymakers, Gene. So,
and I don't know if this could be a
leads me into my outtake here, or outgoing part of the conversation. Really quickly, how do people get more information? People want to get involved. How to read the report? Where do they go? I know you mentioned the website again. Why don't you repeat it?
So we have a website, which is www.oceanclimateaction.org, O-R-G. And there's not a lot of things there. It's a pretty new website, but it does have the blueprint and the progress report.
You on social media?
I'm on social media, yes.
Is the organization?
Ocean Defense Initiative is not on social media. Urban Ocean Lab is on social media, and Urban Ocean Lab is doing a lot of work in the policies related to coastal cities and what coastal cities need to be doing to prepare for and adapt in a changing climate. So Urban Ocean Lab is a great resource, and I think that there's a lot of people out there who are working in this space, a lot of organizations who are working in the space. Many of them are listed in the blueprint and in the progress report. Many of them have great websites, great resources related to ocean climate issues that you would have more than you ever wanted to read just by looking at the different experts that are in those two reports, or who the organizations that supported those two reports. There's many listed there, and they all have done a lot.
Well, we'll put some of this stuff in the show notes.
Yeah.
Gene, as always, it's a pleasure. It's always we always find a provocative element to our conversations, and we certainly did today.
Yeah, if we get any angry replies or comments, feel free to send them to me.
I certainly will, but we've now got 3 topics to talk about in the future. So I really hope we can get you back for
Sure.
side chat, and we'll pick up on some of the threads that we started here.
All right.
That's my new.
Let's talk about the history of the Magnuson Act sometime. You know, I love to talk about that.
There you go. There you go. So it's really a joy, my friend. I only regret that you guys are not back here on the East Coast in the Washington area, so I could see you guys more often. But
let's go fly fishing. You know, we're good out here. Let's go.
Yeah,
fly
I know, and it's easy for me to say I can drive to Washington, and I won't get on an airplane and go to Portland. So
yeah, well,
there you go.
But I do thank the network for all that you do, and keep up the good work.
Well, we certainly will, and
I see Will from ASGA. Hey, Will, good to see you too. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. And Tom, like I said, any angry comments, just feel free to send them to me. I'm used to it.
I certainly will, but I don't think we'll get them. So,
bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Jean.
If you enjoyed this episode of Waterside Chat, share it with your friends and colleagues. You can check us out on YouTube or most podcast services. To stay up to date on Waterside Chats and the Marine Fish Conservation Network, sign up for emails at conservefish.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you at the next Waterside Chat.